Hello everyone, I'm making another response to Rosa Lichtenstein. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. This is the Trotskyist who I've mentioned on numerous occasions. We used to have our dialectics debate and then it just kind of ended. And now that I made a video about Hegel like a week ago, she has been pestering me ever since. Came to my video, posted like 20 comments, telling everyone how I'm running away from her, not wanting to address her arguments, just taunting me to talk to her, demanding me to respond to her, whatever. Um, like I assume that she is a regular viewer of mine. Like I assume she is subscribed to me because, or maybe this is just a coincidence that because I haven't made like a dialectics video in like a year, but now that I make one, she's all over it. So she claims that the YouTube comments section is somehow, I can't remember the wording she used, like she said like that the YouTube software is like too clunky or something, which makes no sense. So therefore she has to, like, instead of just talking to me in the comments, she just has to write a polemic about me on her website. And I think this is exactly what it's all about. Like, she doesn't want to act, and I'm sure she's gonna just lose her shit because I'm saying this, but she is not actually interested in discussing these things with me. She just wants somebody to to debate, so that she has some fodder for her website, put some new content on her website. At least that's what it looks like, because every time I do anything, every time I make a video that even comes close to mentioning dialectics, she has to make a response to it and put it on her website. Like, usually her stuff is really long. This particular one, this is not too long, so there's basically no reason why to not put this in the comments instead. But oh well. So if I feed into this debate, because I don't think this is actually going to go anywhere, but I'm going to respond to this anyway. But we will see if she responds, because I'm sure she will, but I'm not entirely sure that I will respond to that. But we will see, because I'm not prepared to waste endless hours on this. I'm not prepared to spam all my viewers endlessly with this crap. But I will respond to this particular response of hers. So here it says, I hope the screen capture is good enough so you can actually read what this says, but I'm gonna read it to you anyway. So it says, this is a response to a Marxist-Leninist comrade who posts under the name of Finnish Bolshevik. The original debate can be accessed here. In reply, Finnish Bolshevik had this to say. Original debate. So has...
Hello, comrades.
No, this is linked to my video. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. So she told me, like, and this, there's like a lot of history to this discussion, but the topic of external forces came up in terms of dialectics, and I talked about them because she said that the concept of external forces was invented by Stalinists, because otherwise, according to her, dialectics doesn't make sense. So the evil Stalinists had to just try to make it seem like it actually makes sense, so they invented those. So that's what she says. Now, I don't agree with that at all. So then she responded to me again, and I told her that I had never even heard Stalin ever say use the term external contradiction, because that's the term that she uses. I've always used the term external force because that's what other people have been using. So all of a sudden she begins using this term external contradiction, which to me sounded like she's trying to make it seem like it's somehow not compatible with the idea in dialectics that internal contradictions are the main thing. So basically I challenged her on that. I asked, why do you use this term external contradictions instead of external force, and what makes you say that this is like a Stalinist invention or something, because obviously everyone before Stalin also used the external forces in dialectics. Nobody denies the existence of external forces in dialectics. We will get more deeply into this later, but basically, so that's what this is about. So then she actually sends me a link to a Stalin quote where Stalin uses the term external contradiction. And I actually had seen that quote before, but I didn't remember. Because I told her that, you know, you claim that this is like a Stalinist invention, please send me a link to like a quote where he actually even uses it, because I've only seen one instance in a Stalin text where the term external contradiction is used, and that's the on the final victory of socialism in the USSR or something like that. And it's not even Stalin who uses that. It's somebody else sends a letter to Stalin, and Stalin responds to it, like an open letter. But anyway, so yeah, she did send me a link to one quote, and I said to that quote, the first Stalin quote is again talking about foreign policy. I'm not sure he even means that in the dialectical sense. He doesn't treat the external contradiction as a reason for the internal development of the country. He treats it as an internal contradiction of the world revolution anyway. The Mao quote is much the same, because she did send me a Mao quote as well. I don't really care about the other people. If that's the best you can do, I don't think your case is that strong. You seem to rely mostly on stuff some Brezhnev-era revisionists who wouldn't agree with Stalin or Mao, and who I don't agree with. Because basically, to make her case, she sent me one quote from Stalin, one quote from Mao, which were kinda weak. Like they didn't necessarily prove her case very strongly. It's kind of up for debate. So then she sends me like 6 other quotes from people I don't care about, like some Brezhnev era people, like from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it just seems like if you actually had some better stuff, you wouldn't need to resort to that. Because usually, like if I'm arguing against Trotsky, then I'm gonna quote Trotsky. I'm not gonna quote some other guy. I'm not gonna quote some Trotskys from the 90s, or somebody who was not even a Trotskyist from like the 90s. I'm gonna quote Trotsky from the 20s and 30s. So similarly, she's arguing against supposedly like a Stalinist invention. Just quote Stalin then. Quote the actual Stalinists. I mean, what are these Stalinists who, you know, lived during the de-Stalinized revisionist Soviet Union? It makes very little sense, unless, of course, her case is not very strong and she just needs anything she can get, so, you know, she's gonna quote those people instead. So, she says, I have asserted several times that Finnish Bolshevik doesn't seem to know his own theory. Well, you have, but that doesn't mean anything. And above we see that allegation confirmed yet again. Oh, we do? Here is the relevant section from his earlier video. Oh, and by the way, this is like a really cheap ad hom, because she quotes me from my video, and every time I say or every time she feels the need that she has to emphasize it and write it down like dot 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 comma, like why do you need to do that? I mean, it's obviously just to make me seem less intelligent. Like, English is not my first language, it's my second language. So, and Finnish people in general, we in general speak really slow, and we use words like that. It's pretty funny actually. Like, Finnish people joke about it all the time. Like, somebody asks you, "Oh, what's this?" And every time, like, the first response you give is I mean, it's a really cheap and stupid attack. So yeah. Anyway, so this is a quote from an earlier video of mine. So in the video, I'm reading from her website. So in order to avoid such absurd consequences, some dialecticians, mainly Stalinists and Maoists, have had to allow for the existence of external contradictions or impulses. Again, this is quoting from my video. So it says, now there's so much wrong with this short quote that I don't even know if I have the time to go through all of it. But they're literally saying that Lenin completely denies external forces. And then there's a quote from another portion of my video where it says, then it uses the word external contradictions. I've never heard that before. Never. External contradictions. So it's basically just external forces, but they call it external contradictions, so it would sound more made up, basically. So once again, dishonest word play here. Yeah, because I've read plenty of Stalin, I've read plenty of Mao, and plenty of Lenin. There's, even now, even after she has linked me her source, there's still only one instance in the entire library of Stalin's works where this term external contradiction is used. I mean, maybe there's other ones, because I haven't read everything. Like, I've read a good chunk of the stuff, so maybe the term is used somewhere else, but so far I only know 2 instances where it's used, and only in one of those is it actually used by Stalin. And it's used in a rather loose kind of context, so it's hard to know what it's actually even, like, what it means. Because there could be one meaning to it, but then she is asserting that there's another meaning, so it's kind of up for debate. So she says, now I asserted that the term external contradiction was invented by Stalinists and Maoists for 2 basic reasons. 1, in order to argue that socialism was possible in one country, and 2, in order to account for external causation, for example, the external pressure applied by imperialist powers. But Finnish Bolshevik says he had never heard of the term and implied I made it up. We can now see that I didn't make this term up. Will Finnish Bolshevik apologize and withdraw that fib? I'm not holding my breath. I didn't say that you made the term up. I said that you made up the fact that it's supposedly made up by Stalinists. Because because you're quoting me, and in this quote I say that they call it external contradictions instead of external forces, so that it would sound more made up. So I'm not saying that you made it up. I'm saying that you're using this weird term that most people don't use, so that you can make it sound more made up. Because you're claiming that it's made up. I'm not claiming it's made up. It's you. You say that Stalinists and Maoists made it up for 2 reasons. Invented by Stalinists and Maoists for 2 basic reasons. That's what you're saying. So, apologize and withdraw that. Well, I'm not accusing you of making the term up, so you have misunderstood me. But anyway, like, now she's claiming, this is actually quite interesting. I think she's like heavily moving the goalpost, because she told me that, oh, like, originally, way back, she says that, oh, the Stalinists and Maoists invented this because dialectics doesn't make sense, so they're trying to like patch it up, and they're doing a bad job. They're like trying to fix this thing so that dialectics seems to make sense. Then I respond to that and say, you know, that's baseless. I've never even heard this term. Then she tells me, oh, it's a real term, you know, and I'm like, well, I googled the term, doesn't come up with anything. I Google Stalin external contradictions, Mao external contradictions, doesn't come up with anything. Only comes up with Lenin stuff where the actual term is not even used. It just uses the term external or the term contradiction, but not external contradiction. So finally, she links me to, you know, that quote. So I finally understand what she's talking about. So then my response was to say, as it says in this first YouTube comment that she's quoting, the first Stalin quote is talking about foreign policy, not sure he even means it in the dialectical sense. So that was my initial response. So then she turns around and says, oh, actually they invented it because of foreign policy reasons. I'm like, what? You didn't say anything about foreign policy originally. You said that they invented it because otherwise dialectics doesn't make sense. Then I say, well, I'm not sure it's even about dialectics. They're talking about foreign policy, and you're like, nope, they invented it to justify their foreign policy dialectically. Like, not too sure about that. So this is her original argument, which is what I was responding to originally. It quotes Woods and Grant, who I think are Trotskyists, so I'm not gonna really defend them if they say something stupid, but whatever. It says, quote, matter is self-moving and self-organizing. Now, that's perfectly reasonable to me. I agree with that. So she responds to that by saying, but if this were indeed so, nothing in nature could have any effect on anything else. Why? What on earth makes you say that? Nothing in nature could have any effect on anything else. They never said that. That's weird. They say matter is self-moving and self-organizing. So you mean that it's only self-organizing and self-moving, and that self-motion means that nothing has effect on anything else? Well, that's odd. I've never heard that before. What a weird understanding of dialectics you have. Or is like, I'm not sure if you're trying to be. I'm not sure if this is your honest opinion or if you're just trying to make build a weird straw man, because this is a crazy argument. Hence, while you might think that it's your kick that moves the football, in fact, according to the above, the ball moves itself. Oh God, no. Yeah, mechanical materialism would have you think that you kick the ball just moves. But in reality, your foot and the ball are in a dialectical relation. Nobody has, well, like, okay, let's assume that people actually believed what you're claiming that they believe. You're claiming that according to dialectics, everything only moves by itself, nothing ever affects anything else. Now, where's the dialectics part of that? How can there be two things in a dialectical relation if, as you're claiming, dialectics claims that nothing affects anything else? That's a crazy argument. Nobody would ever claim that. Nobody would ever believe that. Jesus. She continues. Now, in order to avoid such absurd consequences, I don't know. I think your consequences are pretty absurd. Like, because nobody actually believes these consequences. There is no such consequence. It's a straw man built by you. But I guess, you know, that's why straw mans are used, in order to attack them, basically. Now, in order to avoid such absurd consequences, some dialecticians, mainly Stalinists and Maoists, have had to allow for the existence of external contradictions or impulses, contrary to what Woods and Grant, for example, assert, which are somehow also involved in such changes. Here, for example, is Stalin. Okay, so now here is the famous Stalin quote. And I'm being, half sarcastic here. It's not a famous quote at all. Quote, "Our country exhibits two groups of contradictions. One group consists of the internal contradictions that exist between the proletariat and the peasantry. The other group consists of external contradictions that exist between our country as the land of socialism and all the other countries as lands of capitalism." So yeah, that's where the term external contradictions is used in a, in my opinion, in a very loose context, in a foreign policy context. We're not talking about dialectics of nature in here. We're not talking about, it's not all too clear that he even means this in any kind of dialectical sense, because, the terms external and the words external and contradiction are very common words, because basically this comment, even though according to her it's all about dialectics, you could read this comment to anyone and they would understand. It doesn't require any kind of understanding of dialectics to understand this, because he's saying that there's groups internal to the country, social classes that are in a contradiction, and then there's groups outside the country which are in contradiction with the country. So anyone can understand this. Like, there's capitalist countries out there who don't like us, and then there's social groups in this country that are in contradiction with each other. You don't have to be a dialectics expert to understand this. You don't have to know anything about dialectics. You don't even have to understand that dialectics exists to understand what this is about. So it's not necessarily even about dialectics. And there's a couple other points that I would like to make about this Stalin quote, but we'll get to them later. So she continues, but as seems obvious, this makes a mockery of the idea that all change is internally generated, just as it undermines the contrast drawn above between mechanical and dialectical theories of motion. Indeed, what becomes of Lenin's demand if there's countless changes that violate its dialectical principle? Well, I mean, some principles don't apply 100% of the time. Just saying. I mean, I'm not even saying that this is the case here. I'm just pointing that out. There's even accepted scientific principles that don't always apply, but whatever. This is just a stupid argument. And by the way, Lenin's demand that she references here is it's from a Lenin quote. Let's actually just find it on this site so we can be absolutely sure. So here it is. Dialectical logic demands that we go further. It requires that an object should be taken in development, in self-movement, as Hegel sometimes puts it. That's what Lenin says. So we should look at things. Basically, the full passage says that we should, to make a good analysis, we should look at things in their entirety, and then we should look at them in isolation, and then we should look at them in their development, their self-motion, and then in their connection with other things. So even in that passage, he is saying, oh, look at them in isolation, but also look at them in connection to other things. But according to Rosa Lichtenstein, they have no connection to anything. Nothing is connected in dialectics. There's no dialectical relationship between anything in dialectics, which is a very strange idea. She claims that it's a dialectical principle that there's no dialectics in dialectics. Weird. So she's literally claiming, make note of this. Stalin says, oh, external contradictions. And I'm like, I'm not sure he's even talking about dialectics, but then Rosa is like, nope, he's talking about dialectics. I'm like, okay, but aren't you the one who was saying that in dialectics there's no external forces? Because for the longest time I told her, you cannot possibly claim that Lenin thinks there's no external forces. You cannot possibly think that. You cannot possibly think that Engels thinks there's no external forces. So you cannot claim that this is like a Stalinist invention, because clearly Lenin believes that there's external forces. Clearly Marx and Engels believe there's external forces, so you can't claim that this is like a Stalinist invention. The famous example that I used in my earlier video, it's the famous example from Engels, where Engels is talking about how there's a seed, and then there's moisture and heat, and then it, which are external forces, and then it grows into a plant. So clearly, the actual growing of the plant is because of the internal forces that are doing their stuff inside the seed. The seed has the potential to become a plant. The molecules in it and the genes in it are doing that. It's internal to the seed. It's nothing outside forcing it to become a plant. But then again, it requires some energy and nutrients. So clearly the external forces in that case are a factor. And that's from Engels. So clearly it's not like, was Engels a Stalinist? So for the longest time I've always been bringing this up, like, you cannot believe this nonsense, this is insane. So finally she, responds to me and says, no, I never claimed that according to Lenin there's no external forces. I never said it, never even implied it. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're saying you'd never even implied it? I mean, you heavily imply it all over the place. What is this? You say, this makes a mockery of the idea that all change is internally generated. What does? Like, this makes a mockery of Lenin? What does? The idea that there's external forces? Like, what are you talking about? Of course you're claiming that. Like, how can you deny that you're arguing that Lenin doesn't believe in external forces when you're saying that all, like, everywhere? Like, look at this. This is another example from her website. It's a stupid joke, but anyway. So, question: how many dialecticians does it take to change a light bulb? Answer: none at all. The light bulb changes itself. Now this is a really terrible explanation of, and a total like misunderstanding of the entire concept of self-motion. But in any case, like, I'm not sure, like, I used to think that this is just a joke, but this is actually like a pretty good summary of her entire argument, because this is what she's actually saying. It's crazy. But anyway, so this is what she said originally, but now she is claiming that no, the Stalinists invented this to justify foreign policy. They didn't invent it to make dialectics seem better. But where is the foreign policy example? Like, yeah, there's the Stalin quote which talks about foreign policy, but you don't talk about foreign policy, not even once. I mean, like, when we scroll all the way down, nothing about, like, we skip sections and sections. Lenin's images undermine his theory. Mysterious totality. Like, we keep going through chapters and chapters of stuff. Nothing is said about foreign policy or socialism in one country. Only when we get to, I'm just gonna skip to it. What was it called? socialism in one country. Oh, it's not even here. I mean, surely it must be. I'm pretty sure that she eventually gets to it. Yes, is this it? So in this part where she is actually talking about my video, she finally gets to it. So there's no way to know when this stuff was written. So to me it seems very likely that she has written this recently, because first of all it's responding to me. So it's already responding to my original point. So basically this is what doesn't make sense here. We can see that your original point doesn't say anything about foreign policy. You claim it does, but then the part where you're talking about foreign policy is in response to me, so clearly it's written afterwards. But anyway, let's get to the actual point of this instead of just, because I'm just pointing out that this is highly suspicious. But anyway, so here it says, moreover, the idea of that socialism could be built in one country was justified by, among other things, the dubious invention of internal versus external contradictions, later bolstered by the further invention of principal and secondary contradictions, along with the highly convenient idea that some contradictions were, and some were not, antagonistic. Well, yeah, I mean, that's another debate, but, you know, for a long time I thought that Mao was responsible for inventing principal and secondary contradictions, and the idea that contradictions were sometimes antagonistic and sometimes not. But plenty of people have told me that they were actually used before. So it's possible that they were used even before Mao. I mean, but that's another debate. Like, maybe some Mao expert could, like, point out some Marx or Engels quotes, maybe, that if there's like some parts where they use these. But that's a totally different question. So she claims the idea of external and internal contradictions is dubious. External contradictions were of course unknown to Hegel, Marx, Engels, Plekhanov, and Lenin, as was the distinction between principal and secondary contradictions. Moreover, the introduction of external contradictions in fact threatens to undermine dialectics completely. It doesn't. How can you say that they don't believe in external forces, external contradictions as you call them? That's insane to me. But even the idea that there's principal and secondary contradictions, she seems to think that because somebody coins a term, that somebody actually invents a concept. Those are different things. Like, Trotskyists like to say that Stalin invented socialism in one country because the term was coined during his debate with other people who opposed the idea, and he uses the term. But actually, like, Lenin already supported socialism in one country, which actually is interesting because according to Rosa here, it was only justified by a Stalinist invention in dialectics, which apparently goes against Lenin, even though Lenin also believed in socialism in one country. But they just say, oh, but Lenin never used the term because the term wasn't even invented yet. Just because Mao might have coined the term like principal contradiction and secondary contradiction doesn't really mean that Mao invented the whole concept of it. Because clearly all contradictions, like same with antagonistic and non-antagonistic contradictions, clearly not all contradictions are the same, like at least in relation to each other. Because clearly in every situation there's lots and lots of different contradictions, but some of them are the predominant ones. At least, you know, if we're looking at it from a particular point of view, then from that point of view, one pair of contradictions is the meaningful one. But I still can't understand why you say that external forces or external contradictions were, quote, unknown, of course unknown to Hegel, Marx, Engels, Plekhanov, Lenin. What makes you say that? Just because they didn't use the term? Like, is that it? Because the term was coined after them, therefore they didn't even know the entire concept. They couldn't possibly imagine that there's external forces. Are you kidding me? Because after I've been pressuring her to explain this weird, unsubstantiated position to me, she finally like caved in and said, no, I never claimed that Lenin thinks there's no external forces, even though she does right here. But she said that no, Lenin actually believes in external forces, he just has a different interpretation of them, as you know, compared to me. I'm like, and I asked her, like, really? Like, feel free to explain this to me. Like, don't just say, oh, there's this weird interpretation that he has that I'm never gonna explain, and it's just, you know, that's just my cop-out answer to never mention this again. I'm like, okay, you're claiming that Lenin has some weird interpretation of this. What is it? Based on what? Don't just say, no, he has this weird interpretation. Like, based on what? You know, based on stuff. Bye. Never gonna mention this again. Don't just run away from the subject now, right when we're getting to the actual heart of the matter, seemingly. But I think it's time to move on, finally. So, there's always so much stuff going on in this page that it takes forever to get through it, but so she says, Finnish Bolshevik then dismisses the two quotations from Stalin and Mao, to which I referred him on the following grounds. Quote, the first Stalin quote is again talking about foreign policy. I'm not sure he even means that in the dialectical sense. He doesn't treat the external contradiction as a reason for the internal development of the country. He treats it as an internal contradiction of the world revolution anyway. The Mao quote is much the same, end of quote. She continues, given the fact that I had asserted this term was partly introduced in order to account for Stalin's and Mao's foreign policy, external contradictions of imperialist powers, for instance, this shows the point sailed right over Finnish Bolsheviks' head again. Well, we've already dealt with this. The part where you bring this up doesn't mention foreign policy, not even once. Then in a completely different part, which is referring to my video, there you bring this up. But that's referring to my video, so clearly it's written recently. Or at least altered recently. So, I don't necessarily even believe that this is your actual position on this. I think this is just a convenient position that you have switched to now that the other position has become unsustainable. But even if this is your actual position, it's still a stupid position to hold. It's still wrong. She continues, what of this, though, concerning the other Marxist-Leninist theorists I quoted, who also use this term? And then she quotes me. I don't really, quote, I don't really care about the other people. If that's the best you can do, I don't think your case is that strong. You seem to rely mostly on stuff from some Brezhnev-era revisionists who wouldn't agree with Stalin or Mao, and who I don't agree with, end of quote. She continues, now, had Finnish Bolshevik done his homework, he'd have seen I also quote other Marxist-Leninist theorists from the Stalin era. Here's just one example taken from an official dialectical materialism textbook published in 1931. Now this is her YouTube comment. Check if you can even see that quote in here. There's the Stalin quote. There's the Mao quote. Then it says, here are several Marxist-Leninist theorists who use this term liberally. This is from the 70s. This is from the 80s. This is from the late 60s. And then it says here, more of the same can be found in the following. And then it's 1980s, 70s, 60s, and 80s, and 80s. Nothing from the 30s, as she claims that there is. So, you're saying that I didn't do my homework? Like, excuse me for not owning and having read some dialectical materialism textbook published in 1931. Like, sorry. I mean, that's a pretty unreasonable standard to hold. You're like, how can you claim this when it says in this 1931 textbook, which I didn't even quote? Like, I'm referring to the stuff that you quoted. Like, I asked for, okay, provide your evidence, then you provide some quotes. Then I'm saying, well, those don't really look too convincing to me. Then you attack me for not dealing with some other quote that you didn't even bring up. That's not how you're supposed to do things. It says here, he'd have seen I also quote other theorists from Stalin era. Here's just one example. But you didn't. You don't. Anyone can go and see your comment. You're not quoting. This is not quoted in your comment. I mean, you're lying. What do you mean? This is not, like, am I blind? Like, am I blind? I've read through your comment multiple times. It's not mentioned in your comment. This is preposterous. It's so weird anyway. Like now you bring this up. Why didn't you mention this in your original comment? It makes no sense. It would have been much better to just mention this rather than all that other shit. Or did you just stumble upon this like very recently or something? Why didn't you mention this in your original comment? Would have saved us a lot of time. Or did you just think, oh, I got all these other quotes that I'm never gonna use, so I might as well use them now? Was that your rationale? So the quote here says that Marxist-Leninist dialectic does not deny external contradictions, the action of one process on another. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Who would have thought? I mean, yes, indeed. Of course. Who would deny this? Who would be against this? Like, you seem to be the only person in the universe who's against this. Of course. Finally. She draws several conclusions from this. A. My allegations were correct. This term was invented by Stalinists and later appropriated by Mao for the reasons I intimated. Hegel, Marx, Engels, Plekhanov, and Lenin knew nothing of this term or these contradictions. Yeah, they knew nothing of this term, because the term was indeed coined by, like, in the 30s. And that's pretty much it. That's like the only thing you can say. The term was coined in the 30s, or maybe slightly earlier, like in the late 20s. The term was coined. So what? Have you ever considered that somebody could use this argument on anything? Like, say, oh, somebody, like, if somebody coins anything after a person's death, then you can just say that, oh, that's a new invention that these other people didn't agree with. You know, like the fact that Lenin believed in socialism in one country, but Trotsky's claimed that he didn't because the term was coined afterwards. Like, that's literally how stupid this is. B, from the first of the above passages, we can see external contradictions is being used dialectically. Finally, you make an actual point. Thank God. It proceeds from the idea of an indissoluble connection of all processes of actuality and demands a knowledge of the mutual actions of processes, their influence on each other, and their mutual penetration. Like actual dialectics. Who would have thought? So finally you make an actual point. This textbook actually uses it in a dialectical sense, so it's more clear. It's kind of unclear what Stalin meant by it, but at least we know what this textbook means. It's more clear. So, bravo. I just only wish you would have brought this up earlier, instead of all that other irrelevant shit that I don't care about. But good job for bringing it up now. C, once again, I find I have to educate Finnish Bolshevik about his own theory. Oh, because I have never read like this textbook from the 30s. Like, where did you even get this? There's not a very good selection of these kinds of books in Finland available, especially since it's not in the Finnish language, it's in the English language. Generally, like, Stalin era books are kind of hard to get because they were not reprinted in the Soviet Union after the 50s. I have a copy of, like, it's the Finnish language version of the Foundations of Leninism. I got it pretty recently as a gift, and from a Finnish comrade, and it was printed in, I think, 52 or 51. So it's like so the book is like 60 years old. So yeah, sorry for not fucking reading all that shit. That's even like, this one's like from the 30s. That's even older. So yeah, a cheap attack. Like, once again, I have to educate Finnish Bolshevik about his own theory. Like, please. And finally, D, we can now see that the, quote, Brezhnev era revisionists who wouldn't agree with Stalin or Mao, that's what I said, actually do agree with Stalin and Mao on this, as well as the official textbook put out by the Stalinists in the 1930s, so it seems that the Finnish Bolshevik is the revisionist here. Like, for a while I was confused, like, is this supposed to be a joke, or are you serious? You cannot be serious, like, but I've thought plenty of time when I've been reading your stuff that you possibly cannot be serious, like, this has to be a joke. But then turns out, no, it's deadly fucking serious. Do you have any clue how revisionism works? Just because a revisionist happens to agree with me on something doesn't make me a revisionist. Revisionists are people who hold revisionist views on certain subjects. But just because they don't hold revisionist views on all subjects, that doesn't matter. Like, let's say that there's somebody who's a... You know, let's take you, for example. You're a Trotskyite revisionist. You're a Trotskyist who doesn't even agree with dialectics. So you're a revisionist for not agreeing with dialectics. Instead you use formal logic. And then you're also a revisionist for being a Trotskyite. But you still agree with some basic ideas of communism, I assume. So, because I also agree with basic ideas of communism, then that must mean that I'm a revisionist and I'm also a Trotskyite. Like, do I have to draw you a fucking diagram of this? This is like the famous, this is like the most basic logic thing you could ever think. Like, this is like the most basic kind of logic there is. This is literally what they teach 15-year-old kids in school, like, to understand like what logic is. It's like, you know, the famous example, like, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. Like, this is Socrates, this is mortality, and this is all men. Well, I mean, should be the other way around, really. This is Socrates, this is all men, and this is mortality. Like, they're inside one another. Similarly, this is revisionists, and this is all of communists. And then there's me, and then there's you. Doesn't mean we're all the same, doesn't mean we're all revisionists. Like, this has really gotten so stupid, I can't even believe this. And then there's another really cheap attack on me, saying that this is quite apart from the fact, in his earlier video, Finnish Bolshevik was happy to quote from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia published in 1979 by, quote, Brezhnev era revisionists. So this is supposed to be some sort of hypocrisy, but you don't seem to understand one thing. Just because somebody is a revisionist, or even, well, just because something was written during the 70s, during the Brezhnev era, does not mean that it's automatically false. Just like because something was written in the Stalin era doesn't mean that it's automatically correct. It just means that personally, because I don't agree with a lot of Brezhnevism and a lot of revisionism, Therefore, I'm not gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. If they're saying something that's suspicious and seems weird and I can't confirm it from other sources, then I'm not gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. So I'm just saying, if you're gonna quote people, don't quote revisionists to me, because they have no authority in my eyes. So if you're trying to convince me, then don't use them as evidence, because it's not convincing to me. I'm not saying that everything they ever said was wrong, because the stuff that I quoted from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, I quoted like one sentence. It was like a definition of a term, and I quoted it from that. But I already had confirmed that from other sources. I already knew what that was. It was just said in a very concise way, in like one sentence in that. So I quoted it. So please, this is so ridiculous. She continues, so what does Finnish Bolshevik have to say next? Wonder no more, for here are more profound thoughts, obviously being sarcastic. So then there's a short quote from me. Quote, maybe you found more quotes than I have, since you're most likely older than me. Duh. She responds by saying, ouch, I can see I've met my match, or just maybe I know Finnish Bolshevik's theory better than he does. Are you kidding me? Oh god, this is ridiculous. Are you serious? You say, oh, again, I have to educate you because you don't know something. And I'm like, well, you're boasting that you've been doing this for like 30 years. Not even joking. I covered that in the earlier video. I read from her website where it's like, I've studied this in there, I've studied this in here, I've read this, I've read that, I've read everything. I've been studying this for all my life. And now you're saying that, oh, why do I always have to teach you these things? Like, you haven't taught me shit. All you've done is brought up a bunch of quotations that I didn't know. And that's what I'm saying in this comment. Maybe you found more quotes than I have, since you've been doing this for 100 years. Like, wow, what a deep understanding of the subject. And you're saying that I'm making like more profound thoughts, like, maybe I know Finnish Bolshevik's theory better than he does. Wow. Well, at least I don't post ill-informed and largely incoherent videos on YouTube pretending to be some sort of authority on this failed theory. When I assert something, I have evidence to hand, or I don't assert it, unlike Finnish Bolshevik, who seems to think self-inflicted ignorance counts as proof. Holy fucking shit. Incoherent, ill-informed videos on YouTube pretending to be some sort of authority. When have I pretended to be an authority on anything? You're the one who has been saying all the time that, oh, I've been studying this for ages, and I have a degree in that, and I've been studying logic and philosophy, and I've been studying all this in various places, and like, I never said that. You said that. I haven't pretended to be an authority on dialectics. In my last video, which this is in response to, by the way, I said that, oh, I should probably get back to reading more Hegel because I haven't read enough. So does that sound like I'm pretending to be an authority, like I'm somehow infallible or something? I'm like, this is my understanding, you're not really sure because I haven't read enough and I should get back to reading more. Sounds like I'm really trying to pretend I'm some sort of infallible authority. This short response is even more filled with like stupid ad hominem attacks than your normal stuff, which is saying something. And self-inflicted ignorance, like, this is what she calls self-inflicted ignorance. Because I did not know that Stalin had used the term external contradiction. That's supposedly self-inflicted ignorance. How is it self-inflicted? How is it self-inflicted? I asked you, please provide evidence for your stupid claim. Then you don't. Then I'm like, okay, well, then there's no evidence to believe that. Then I Google the damn thing. Google doesn't come up with anything. I tell you that Google doesn't come up with anything. Then finally you send me the quote. Oh, I'm really like trying to inflict ignorance on myself by asking and asking and asking and fucking Googling and asking you. Jesus fucking Christ, this is stupid. She continues, what erudite repose comes next? Then there's another quote from me. Quote, you've written a lot, but it hasn't achieved that much. You don't need to have quotes from people who are irrelevant. You don't need to have quotes from people who are irrelevant to the subject, nor do they need to be as long. You're trying to do what is referred to as baffling them with bullshit, or at least that's what it looks like. There's a reason why most people don't do that. That's what I told her. I was like, okay, I'm totally being frank here, you know. So she responds, of course I wasn't to know that the Marxist-Leninist authors I quoted were considered by a revisionist Bolshevik comrade to be irrelevant before I quoted them. However, it's good, though, to see the petty sectarianism isn't confined to us Trotskyists, except, of course, we now know that those Brezhnev-era revisionists were closer to Stalin and Mao than Finnish Bolshevik is, at least on this issue. What? You didn't know that those people were irrelevant. I'm asking you, when did Stalin say this? You give me one Stalin quote, and then 6 quotes from other people. You couldn't have foreseen that they were irrelevant to the Stalin question. Is there something like wrong with your brain or something? Like I was asking you, how is this a Stalinist invention? Provide me the Stalin quote or the so-called Stalinist quote. Instead, you give me 1 quote from Stalin, 1 from Mao, and then 6 from other people who are not Stalinists. Ever heard of de-Stalinization? It happened in the 50s. You know? These people are not Stalinists. Should have been pretty obvious that they were irrelevant to the Stalinism issue. Like, then you say, okay, good that there's petty sectarianism in Marxist-Leninist circles as well, and not just in Trotskyist circles. Do you think it's petty sectarianism that I have a problem with the revisionist Soviet Union? I think it's a major disagreement. It's not just petty sectarianism. There's nothing petty about it. And as far as baffling them with bullshit is concerned, here is perhaps an excellent example of the use of this tactic, and then it quotes me from an earlier video where I say that the Trotskyist counter-argument seems to be, this is silly, ha ha ha, like that is not an argument. I mean, physics is kind of funny sometimes, that's not an argument. The rest of their counter-arguments are just silly. That's in response to a comment made by her. Like, she said that there's a contradiction in something that is being said, so therefore it's just absurd. She said that this leads to even more absurd conclusions. That's what she said. That it leads to even more absurd conclusions. She didn't justify it in any way. She just said that this leads to absurd conclusions. So therefore it's wrong. I'm like, just because it's contradictory doesn't mean that it's wrong. Because, as I say in this quote, I mean, physics is kind of funny sometimes. Yeah, physics and math sometimes works in weird ways. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but it still sometimes works in weird ways. Doesn't mean that it's automatically wrong. Just because there's paradoxes or it seems to contradict something. Because, like, either the paradox is wrong, or the math is wrong, or there is a paradox, but it's still not a problem, because you're claiming that because there's a paradox, it's automatically wrong, and you just have to dismiss the whole thing. Then it says, this was taken from Finnish Bolsheviks earlier video. No, this is not what baffling them with bullshit means. As far as I know, baffling them with bullshit means that basically you just use a lot of big words and you just spam the other person into submission. That's literally what you're doing. That's why I said that you're doing that. I'm not doing that. Like, how is this quote from me baffling them with bullshit? I mean, we must be talking about different things. I'm saying that you write a whole bunch of stuff and use big words and have tons of quotes, but still at the end of the day it's all worthless. It doesn't prove anything, doesn't debunk anything. It's all basically a huge waste of time, but it looks so impressive, or it looks daunting, so that you're able to get away with it. Like, this is if I was talking to somebody and I was like, I made some really stupid argument and then I said, oh, but before you can respond you have to read like this 15-volume book set that I've written before you can respond. I mean, I'm sure we have all met people like this online, where you're trying to talk to them and then you're like, they're just spamming stuff, spamming more and more information at you, and it's often irrelevant to the question. And it doesn't really mean anything or support their case or anything. They're just spamming information just so that you can't really properly respond. You're put on the defensive because there's just a constant barrage of shit coming at you. You can never narrow the discussion down to the heart of the matter. That's what your entire website is. That's why I'm saying that you're trying to baffle me with bullshit. You're like, quote, because I ask you a simple question, you provide a very, very meandering, rambling, all over the place answer. Like, give me the Stalin quote. Instead, you give me 6 quotes from other people. You can give me a simple, short, concise answer which answers everything perfectly, or you can give me this stuff that I didn't ask for, which just wastes everyone's time. And it's not just because your responses and everything is long, because I make long videos sometimes. I mean, usually my videos are like 20 minutes. Sometimes they're way longer. But that's because I want to cover a lot of issues. But with you, I mean, your site it doesn't address any particular point very well. And I know that's a harsh thing to say, but I mean, you could just do a good job of debunking the basic ideas of dialectics, but you don't really do that. You just sort of touch on them, and then don't do a good enough job, and then just move on to the next topic. There's like plenty of topics that don't even need to be talked about. Just debunk the core of dialectics, and that should be enough. I mean, I think that this is like your only hobby. You just like doing this. That's why there's so much stuff on your website. You just want to write more of this. So anyway, she continues by saying that Finnish Bolshevik just made this up, which is yet another fib from this revisionist comrade. I don't know what I supposedly made up, but okay. Readers can access the background details here, where they will see just why I've accused Finnish Bolshevik of blatantly lying. You have accused me of lying plenty of times, but it's just so weird. Like, you're the most difficult person to talk to. You seem to misunderstand even the most basic things. When I say something, you immediately think that I'm accusing you of something, and when you're not thinking that I'm accusing you, then you're accusing me. Like, you're accusing me of lying. I haven't lied. I don't know what you mean. Finally, Finnish Bolshevik asks me to educate him some more. Like, you're the most dishonest person ever. Like, why are you saying that I'm lying? I mean, look at you. Like, yeah, because this is exactly how it went, right? Finally, Finnish Bolshevik asked me to educate him some more concerning Lenin's interpretation of external forces. Yeah, because you're like, Lenin has this weird interpretation of external forces that doesn't agree with you. I'm like, and I respond sarcastically by saying, really? Enlighten me. And she takes it completely seriously. She's like, I think we can all see that task is impossible. Finnish Bolshevik just ignores what he doesn't like or misreads what little he seems to be able to take in. Wow. I'm asking you to provide evidence for your stupid claims. Like, I could say, imagine if I said that in some other argument. Somebody asked me for evidence, I'm like, oh, you're just stupid. Google it, educate yourself. That's a totally unreasonable position to hold. Although, you know, some people are like that, and a lot of people have, like, a lot of people point out these idiots who are, like, arguing with people, and when you challenge them, they're like, oh, I don't have time to answer your questions, just Google it, figure it out yourself. I'm not going to justify my own position. I'm not going to provide evidence for my own claims. I mean, you have to figure them out. No, you make a claim, you provide the evidence. It's not my job. Interested and educable readers can find my words of enlightenment here. Then it links to the previous response to me. But since it links to a previous response to me, then how is it supposed to provide any additional information to me? Because we have already been through this, but you just now made the claim that Lenin has this strange interpretation of external forces. But it links to an old response. Like, care to elaborate at all on this? Well, I think that's enough. Surely that is enough. To save time, to narrow it down, to make it, you know, basically try to improve this discussion a little bit. Although I know that you want to turn this into a major polemic against me, rather than an actual discussion, because you're not interested in actually talking about these things, you just want to use this as content for your website apparently. But if you actually want to have a serious discussion, then why don't you just explain your position on Lenin? Like, do that. Before you go off on a crazy tangent about something totally different, just explain your position on Lenin in your response. That's all for now. I will see you guys later with something else. So, until next time, red salute.